7,500 years ago, the Pacific floor collapsed. Massive landslides buried the seabed in seconds. Fast forward to today, robot subs have examined the place. Scans have revealed proof of at least 10 distinct cyclical megaquakes. Now, researchers warn, the plates are still locked and building pressure, even today. If they start moving, that could trigger new red alert earthquakes and send disastrous tsunamis toward the coast. Let's look at the map. The fault here is like a giant zipper. It's over 600 miles, stretching from northern California to Canada. It's called the Cascadia subduction zone, and it's a part of the Ring of Fire. You know, the famous giant horseshoe around the Pacific that can serve as your where-to-go reminder if you're into volcanic and earthquake tourism. One of Cascadia's biggest events happened around the year 1700. There are no local written records of it, but there is a story. A well-known indigenous legend tells of an epic battle between a thunderbird and a whale. In the story, the thunderbird's wing beats make the ground shake. The whale's thrashing sends seawater flooding inland. The thunderbird wins by finally grabbing the whale and slamming it back down, shaking the land itself. Many researchers believe that this legend originated from the real earthquake of 1700. But we don't just have cool myths to give us the full picture. In the early 1700s, samurai officials recorded waves flooding villages and rice fields. But nobody felt the earthquake that must come first. That's why they nicknamed this event the Orphan Tsunami. But it did have a parent, and it took scientists 300 years to finally connect it back to Cascadia. To see Cascadia's past, researchers sent robot subs to scan the bottom in crazy detail. They expected to see a simple crack, but what they found looked more like giant underwater steps. Some of those steps are about 33 feet tall, like a 3-story building. That only happens when a big piece of the seafloor snaps off, breaks loose, and slides all at once, not slowly. When that happens, it kicks up a mud avalanche. Picture a jar of dirt and water. Shake it hard, and a fresh layer settles at the bottom. Each layer is basically a timestamp from a huge quake. When scientists counted and dated them, they found 10 separate megaquakes that hit one after the other over thousands of years. That means that Cascadia doesn't let pressure out little by little. It stays stuck for a long time, then suddenly breaks out violently. That pattern is why the Cascadia subduction zone is considered one of the scariest fault systems in North America today. So what's actually happening down there? The plates aren't sliding smoothly, they're stuck. And while they're stuck, the coastline is getting quietly bent out of shape, like a ruler you're flexing in your hands. It doesn't look dramatic day to day, but it's been loading up for centuries. When that tension finally snaps, the coast will instantly drop. Geologists call this co-seismic subsidence. We're talking about the ground plunging 6 to 8 feet vertically in a matter of minutes. Imagine standing on a beach. The shaking stops, and you realize the ocean is rushing in. Not just because of a wave, but because the land you're standing on has physically sunk below sea level. That one move is enough to shove the seafloor out of position and force the ocean above it to react. Cascadia can produce a magnitude 9.0. That's top tier, categorized as the most destructive natural event that can happen. It can shake the ground for minutes, pushing and pulling everything back and forth until buildings and bridges start falling down. A 9.0 class quake also means the seafloor is vibrating and shifting, lifting in some spots, dropping in others, all in one sudden motion. A tsunami starts when the seafloor moves and pushes a huge amount of water out of the way. If the bottom suddenly lifts or drops, the water above it gets displaced instantly. That water has to go somewhere, so it races outward in every direction. Out in deep water, that wave is rarely tall. It spreads out across a long distance, so it can pass under ships without anyone noticing. The danger is speed. In the open ocean, tsunamis can travel around 500 to 600 miles per hour. That's like traveling from New York to Detroit in 60 minutes. Eventually, the ocean starts to pile up, getting taller by the second. Near shore, it can stack up to tens of feet, and in extreme cases, it can run up to 100 feet on land. It swallows the coast, then drags everything back to sea with a violent tug before the next hit arrives. But that's not all. When the fault snaps, it often triggers massive underwater landslides. When a huge chunk of seafloor collapses, it can shove water locally, like dropping a boulder into a tub. In the Cascadia subduction zone, you aren't just dealing with the earthquake's kick. You're getting a 1-2 punch from the shifting crust and the crumbling slopes combined. On parts of the Oregon coast, emergency experts say the shaking could last 5 to 7 minutes, long enough to realize what's happening and still won't be over. Then comes the scariest part. In some places, a tsunami can hit in 15 to 30 minutes. Remember, the earthquake is a warning. If you're on the coast and you feel strong, long shaking, you do not need to wait for a text alert or a siren, or someone on the news to yell tsunami. During the tremors, the basic recommendation is to literally drop to the ground, cover, and hold on, staying away from windows and chandeliers that can fall on you. As tempting as it is, we shouldn't stop to make a reel out of the situation. Before anything happens, make one decision while your brain is calm. Pick the closest high ground and go for it. Not somewhere uphill, an actual spot. If you ever needed a reason to learn your neighborhood, this is it. Your instinct might say, get into the car and drive. But don't. Roads are probably jammed and bridges could be damaged. People who live on the coast already know to keep it practical, with shoes on the bed and a go bag prepared just in case. The danger doesn't end with the first impact because the tsunami waves, well, they come in waves. The initial hit is rarely the largest, and the ocean can continue to pulse in and out for hours. This creates a violent tug-of-war. The receding water acts like a massive vacuum, dragging anything caught in the backwash out to sea. Japan's 2011 disaster is the most recent vivid example of what a magnitude 9.1 can do. The seafloor shifted in a single massive heave, and minutes later, the ocean literally rearranged the coast. A huge wall of water crashed inland, reaching over 100 feet high in some spots and turning the coastline into a conveyor belt of debris. It was like water turned cars into giant bowling balls and shipping containers into massive metal bricks, smashing ports and drowning low-lying airports and electrical substations. Finally, what do officials say about the timeline for the possible next disaster hitting Cascadia? Well, they can't give us precise dates, but they did announce some odds. For the biggest, scariest earthquake possible, the United States Geological Survey says there is about a 10% to 15% chance it'll happen in the next 50 years. Chances for a quake that isn't the mega version are 1 in 3 in the next 5 decades. Those odds are actually pretty high. But here is why it isn't all that grim. Scientists know this isn't random. Cascadia has a pattern, and patterns are what preparation runs on. We already know how to build for big shaking, and we're getting better at spotting where stress is building. It doesn't mean we can stop the earthquake, but it means we're getting way better at knowing what to expect. In the meantime, just keep a go bag by the door and maybe take a walk around your neighborhood every once in a while. Something is about to reshape the entire future of the West Coast. The coastline, the infrastructure, the whole map. Scientists fear there is not one but 2 big earthquakes coming, one caused by another. This wasn't even on the radar for most people, but new research is changing everything. For decades, everyone treated the San Andreas Fault and the Cascadia subduction zone like 2 separate monsters that just happened to live in the same neighborhood. They were powerful, yes, but independent. But now, scientists believe these 2 giant faults are mechanically linked, and one can literally pull the other into rupturing shortly afterward. Cascadia moves, San Andreas moves. San Andreas tears, Cascadia tears, and the potential consequences of that are honestly haunting. Scientists found evidence that it happened at least 10 times in the last 3,100 years. Earthquake, pause, earthquake. It comes from marine sediment cores, which are like time capsules pulled up from the ocean floor. Researchers analyzed layer after layer of seabed sediment and found doublets, paired debris layers created by two massive quakes happening so close together that the ocean barely had time to settle between them. That discovery takes us to the Mendocino Triple Junction, the geological troublemaker of the West Coast. It's the place where three tectonic plates crash and grind into each other like badly aligned gears. It's also the zone where the San Andreas meets Cascadia, which makes it the perfect place for these double quakes to form. The stress changes caused by a rupture in one fault travel straight through this junction and destabilize the other. It's benign when it happens to a bookshelf. When you move one book, three others shift. But when you think about it like a coastline with millions of people, entire cities, major infrastructure, it instantly feels terrifying. To many people who live on the West Coast, the San Andreas kind of feels like a California's problem, and Cascadia like an Oregon and Washington's problem. But when you understand that these two faults can essentially fire at each other, it stops being a local issue and becomes a continental one. A Cascadia megaquake alone can hit magnitude 9.0 plus, rip open 600 to 700 miles of seafloor, and send a tsunami roaring toward the Pacific coast. And it could just be the first quake, and then, maybe minutes later, the San Andreas snaps in Northern California. The shaking could ripple down the state like a zipper tearing open a jacket, and if it goes the other direction, it could be just as bad. If the San Andreas ruptures first, the intense stress redistribution can destabilize the Cascadia subduction zone. You could get the California quake first with buildings rocking, highways breaking, and power stations failing. And then, soon after, the ocean pulls back in Oregon or Washington. And the 20-minute countdown to a tsunami begins, a follow-up disaster. It's the kind of chain reaction you don't want even in a video game, let alone real life. This discovery also tells us something eerie about the earthquake in 1700, the one that sent a tsunami across the Pacific so huge that it struck Japan with no warning. Japanese fishermen called that wave the orphan tsunami because it arrived without any felt shaking. Only centuries later, scientists figured out that it came from the Pacific Northwest. But until recently, no one knew that the San Andreas might have felt that event too, and it possibly slipped or destabilized because of it. So, the whole West Coast may have moved together. And we've come to the scariest part. All this isn't about if, it's strictly about when. The faults have a rhythm, a pace, and a geological heartbeat. We've seen how they behave across thousands of years. We know what they did, and now we know they sometimes do it in sequence. The real fear isn't the first quake. California already expects a big one. The real fear is the second quake, the one that comes before you've checked on your family, before emergency responders regroup, before the power comes back, and before the dust settles. Even if you don't live on the West Coast, this matters for you too. The ports in California, Oregon, and Washington handle a massive chunk of America's imports. Knock them offline, and it's not just the coastline that feels it. The ripple hits the entire country and potentially the world. Grocery prices spike, supply chains freeze, gas availability dips, shipping timelines go nuts. The world is much more connected than any of us thought, and a geological double punch on the Pacific coast wouldn't stay a local disaster. It would spread, thread by thread, into everyone's life. So, those in power must prepare not for one giant rupture, but for two. Emergency plans, evacuation routes, response times, and power grid designs, all of it needs updating. Because nature has now shown us what even a single major rupture can do to a modern economy. It happened in Japan in 1995, on January 17th at 5:46 in the morning. The quake hit right by the northern tip of Awaji Island, only 12 miles from Kobe, a huge, busy city with about 1.4 million people back then, and another 2.6 million in Osaka nearby. The rupture ripped along the Nojima Fault for about 25 miles. That doesn't sound like much until you realize entire buildings can't survive that kind of sideways shove. More than 5,000 people lost their lives. 43,000 were injured. Nearly 400,000 buildings were irreparably damaged. This disaster hit one of Japan's largest industrial zones. And when you mess with a place like that, the shock doesn't stop at the shoreline. The damage was $200 billion US in losses, from smashed buildings and infrastructure and many businesses shutting down. Kobe's port just collapsed. Only 30% of the Osaka-Kobe railway lines worked. Part of National Route 28 literally vanished into the ground. Schools, hospitals, and municipal buildings, 85% of them took damage or were unusable. Fires broke out across Kobe, almost 300 separate incidents, burning the equivalent of 70 US city blocks and taking another 600 to 700 lives. Almost 100,000 people permanently left the region, 2.5% of the whole population gone in less than a year. And here's a detail that stuck with me. So many bridges failed that engineers suddenly had to confront how poorly older designs handled lateral shaking. Houses with heavy tiled roofs, built to fight typhoons, crumbled because all that weight sat too high. But the newer homes made after the 1981 building code revision stood. And that's when Japan realized that modern seismic standards were crucial to follow. Japan threw $58 billion US into restoring the region. Power came back in days. Roads and rail returned in 5 to 8 months. The main expressway took 21 months. The port was fully rebuilt in just over 2 years. And by then, all debris was cleared. Within 15 months, manufacturing jumped back to 98% of its old level. Stores reopened. By 1999, Kobe's economy reached roughly 75 to 90% of pre-quake levels. Japan overhauled its disaster management system entirely. They set up the Central Disaster Management Council and rewrote building codes. They upgraded everything from emergency drills to fire-resistant city layouts, and they launched the Earthquake Early Warning System that now gives Japan those precious few seconds before shaking hits. The same system that saved countless lives since 2007. But despite all this improvement, the Kansai region still sits on dangerous ground. The Roko Awajishima fault system, the same one that snapped in 1995, still runs under them. The 2018 Northern Osaka quake and the 2024 Noto Peninsula quake reminded everyone that this threat didn't disappear. It just waits its turn. A future large event on that system could hit even harder simply because the region has grown more complex, more interconnected, and more economically loaded. So Kobe wasn't even a triggered double fault rupture, but it still broke a major industrial hub, reshaped a national economy, and permanently changed global shipping routes. That's why when scientists started talking about two joint faults firing off back-to-back in Cascadia and San Andreas, you don't even have to imagine the consequences. We already got a preview in 1995. On January 26, 1700, one of the biggest earthquakes in history hit off the coast of the United States. It had a magnitude of 9, which puts it in the top 10 most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. This earthquake triggered a huge tsunami and changed the coastline all the way from southern British Columbia down to northern California forever. Back then, the area wasn't very populated, but thanks to some clever research, scientists figured out exactly what happened that day by looking at old geological records, tree rings, and even some history from Japan. On the same day as the earthquake, a massive tsunami also hit Japan's eastern coast. For a long time, no one connected the two, but in the 1980s and 90s, researchers realized the tsunami in Japan had been caused by the earthquake in the Pacific Northwest. They were also able to pinpoint the exact day, January 26, 1700. They even found old trees in coastal Washington that had all perished around the winter of 1700, which matched up perfectly with the timing of the earthquake. The earthquake came from the Cascadia subduction zone, a fault where the Juan de Fuca plate, slides under the North American plate. This fault stretches about 700 miles, from northern Vancouver Island in British Columbia to Cape Mendocino in California. The pressure from the moving plates builds up over time, and eventually, another big, devastating earthquake will hit the same region. It's just a matter of time. By looking at the geological records, past tsunami deposits, and signs of land level changes, scientists can figure out how often these huge earthquakes happen. Emergency planners have been preparing for the next big quake, often calling it the big one. Scientists believe earthquakes in the Cascadia subduction zone happen every 200 to 1,000 years. And since the last major one was over 300 years ago, the Pacific Northwest is definitely due for another. When it happens, the earthquake is expected to be as big as the one from 1700. But this time, it'll affect around 15 million people. The devastation will be severe. Buildings will collapse, roads and runways will crack, and bridges will fall. Communication in and out of the area will be cut off. But the worst part? The earthquake will trigger a massive tsunami that might hit parts of the Washington coast in as little as 10 minutes. It's not a matter of if, but when the Cascadia subduction zone will break. When it happens, it will be the worst disaster the US has ever faced. Worse than the Hurricane Katrina or Superstorm Sandy. It'll impact an enormous area stretching from southern British Columbia all the way down through Oregon to northern California. That means millions and millions of people will be affected. Fairchild is considered a backup staging area for handling the aftermath of the earthquake, with Grant County International Airport in Moses Lake being the main one. For those who will survive the initial quake and tsunami, the aftermath could be just as disastrous. Aftershocks will follow, and transportation will be a mess. Roads will be damaged or completely blocked, airports will shut down, and most of the main routes, like Interstate 5, will have bridges destroyed. This means food and water supplies will be cut off, and it will be incredibly difficult for help to get in or for people to escape. Gas pipelines will most likely be damaged too, and restoring them could take anywhere from a few days inland to weeks or even months along the coast. Power outages will be widespread within 100 miles of the coast throughout the entire Pacific Northwest. And water could be out for 3 to 7 months. Even telecommunications will be down for 2 to 3 months across the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and even parts of East Asia. The good news for eastern Washington is that it will mostly avoid the worst of it, thanks to natural barriers between the west and east sides of the state. The tsunami may hit the Columbia River Gorge, but it will lose energy quickly because of a sandbar under the river. The Cascade Mountains will absorb much of the earthquake's impact, so the east side won't feel it as strongly. And since eastern Washington won't get hit as hard, it'll be up to them to handle the aftermath of the quake. That means helping western Washington, taking in refugees from the areas that got destroyed, and delivering supplies to where they're needed. Scientists have looked at other major 8.0 to 9.0 magnitude earthquakes like the ones in Chile in 1960, Alaska in 1964, and Sumatra in 2004, and Japan in 2011. These kinds of quakes can shake the ground for anywhere between 6 to 10 minutes, and that's a long time for the ground to be shaking. Such quakes are super intense because they happen close to Earth's surface, so it's not just a quick shake. It's a long, strong one that can cause a lot of damage. If the Cascadia earthquake and tsunami were to hit tomorrow, over 13,800 people could lose their lives, and about 107,000 people could be injured. The economic toll in Washington, Oregon, and California could top $70 billion. To put that into perspective, we can compare these numbers with some other major earthquakes. In Chile's 1960 earthquake, about 1,650 people lost their lives. The 1964 Alaska quake resulted in around 140 lives lost. The 2004 Sumatra earthquake and tsunami took the lives of an estimated 280,000 people. And the 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunami caused over 20,000 casualties. Authorities know about the dangers of the Cascadia fault, but even with all the planning, no one can say for sure what will be needed when the big quake hits. Right after the earthquake and tsunami, the areas outside the immediate disaster zone won't be able to help much because roads and airports will be destroyed, and resources will be limited. How can we deal with this kind of disaster and its effects? We don't have all the answers yet. Right now, let's focus on the Cascadia subduction zone. It's a huge fault line that stretches about 620 miles from Vancouver Island to Cape Mendocino in California, sitting about 93 miles off the coast. It's like one tectonic plate is slowly sliding under another. When the plates are close to the surface, about 18 miles deep or less, they get stuck because of friction, kind of like pushing two rocks together. Over time, this creates a lot of pressure. When the pressure finally becomes too much, the plates slip, causing a massive earthquake. This is called a megathrust earthquake, and it can be huge. Below the area where the plates are stuck, there's a zone where the plates move really slowly. We're talking about just a few inches every few months. This slow movement helps to release some of the pressure, but it also builds up more pressure on the parts of the fault that are still stuck. This means that over time, it increases the chances of a huge earthquake happening. These massive quakes, called Great Subduction Zone earthquakes, can be stronger than magnitude 8.5. Megathrust earthquakes are the biggest earthquakes that happen. They can go over a magnitude of 9.0, which is insanely powerful. Just to put it in perspective, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake releases 1,000 times more energy than a 7.0 and 1,000,000 times more energy than a 5.0. These earthquakes happen when a lot of pressure builds up in a part of the fault that's locked, which means the plate can't move past each other. When that pressure gets too high, the fault finally ruptures, releasing all that built-up energy in one massive shake. The Cascadia subduction zone is super long. That's why if it were to rupture all at once, it could produce a large earthquake. Scientists have studied this region and found that about 18 miles below the surface, the fault is completely locked. The plates there aren't sliding past each other. But deeper down, the plates start to slide more smoothly, causing less friction. This is important because it tells us how much stress is building up in that locked zone, and how it could eventually lead to a major earthquake.
So, since 2000, the world has been hit with more than 1,700 earthquakes with magnitude greater than 5. Many happened around the Ring of Fire, located around the Pacific Ocean. In North America, the biggest threat is the San Andreas Fault Line, which can create an earthquake of a magnitude higher than any other, earning it the spine-tingling nickname, the Big One. The potential destruction of California is a terrifying prospect that could have unimaginable consequences. But the Big One is just the beginning of what's to come. Bad news! Scientists have predicted an earth-shattering event that will occur in 2030. Like it or not, there's a 70% chance that we'll experience the Big One, and it will be an earthquake with a magnitude of 6.7. The San Andreas Fault Line will cause the Big One, but what is scary is that we can't predict it. On the other hand, a massive earthquake occurs every 100 years. This means there's always time to prepare for a natural disaster. If we traveled back in time, we'd see a few significant earthquakes like the ones that wiped out San Francisco and Fort Tajon. Buildings made a long time ago are not quake-proof. They will collapse. Even if they survive, you should not enter them. But buildings are not the most dangerous part. You should watch out for electrical lines and gas pipes. Your hill house might be lovely, but it is extremely unsafe. During quakes, the hill can turn into a massive landslide that will destroy everything in its path. Say goodbye to road trips because all the roads will be ruined. You should have some spare water and food since you won't be able to go to the supermarket. This disaster won't be cheap. It will cost the U.S. around $200 billion to recover from the quake. At least the earthquake will not trigger tsunamis, but there's something that can cause more damage than the Big One. The notorious Cascadia subduction zones start in California and ends up all the way in Vancouver, Canada. The San Andreas fault line is nothing compared to this zone. It can wipe the whole coast off the face of the Earth, an example of hyperbole. Subduction zones are tectonic plates forced to be one under the other and constantly pulling apart. One is called the North American Plate, and the other is the Juan de Fuca Plate. Zones like these are not to be messed with, since they are terrifying hotspots for earthquake activity and extremely dangerous because they cause massive underwater quakes. But they are underwater, so what can they do to us? Well, they can cause giant tsunamis, flooding cities, and destroying the coastline. Right now, the most active zone is the Ring of Fire. The Cascadia zone might be less active, but it is like a sleeping beast that can wake up and destroy everything in its path, causing a groundbreaking earthquake. The last time all this stress was released was in the year 1700. Unlike the San Andreas quake, this one will cause massive tsunamis and much bigger shocks. Let's hope you'll be camping in an open field at that time, because most buildings and bridges will likely be destroyed. Also, be ready for the aftershocks, as they'll be devastating. Nature won't be spared either. Landslides will change animals' habitats. Even our homes will be changed forever. Luckily, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and scientists are doing everything they can to ensure our safety. New rules are implemented. Every new building must be able to withstand massive shocks. They're developing modern warning systems, and every new infrastructure must follow strict quake-proof guidelines. The Juan de Fuca and the North American plates are locked together, but they won't stay like that forever. When they unlock, get ready for a massive shake. The closer you are to the epicenter, the more damage you'll experience. But even if you are lucky to be far away, you may still feel the ground shaking for some time. Now, if we compare the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas fault, we'll see how much more dangerous the Cascadia zone is. In 1994, there was an enormous 6.7 magnitude earthquake in the Northridge area, close to the San Andreas fault. Sadly, many people didn't make it, and some were injured. Back then, buildings were not strong and earthquake-proof, and many of them were damaged. The Cascadia subduction zone can potentially cause a magnitude 9 earthquake. A magnitude 6 quake has the power of around 44 million pounds of dynamite, but a magnitude 9 has the power of 44 trillion pounds of dynamite. The strongest ever recorded quake was in Chile. Its magnitude measured 9.5, and it destroyed most everything. So let's say you've survived the quake, but the struggle is far from over. Soon after, a massive tsunami will strike, with waves that might reach up to 100 feet in some areas. That's so unlike the San Andreas earthquake, which can't produce any significant waves. So say goodbye to your beautiful garden, since salt water will destroy trees and plants, changing the environment for a period of time. The only positive thing will be you won't need Halloween decorations, because all those dried-out trees will resemble a ghost forest. The combination of waves, quakes, and the sheer size of the area will make this natural disaster much more dangerous than any caused by the San Andreas fault or the so-called Big One. A quake similar to this happened around 300 years ago. Many more have been recorded in the past 3,500 years, proving that they continually occur every 400 to 600 years. So, technically, we have around 100 to 300 years before the next big one hits. We still have no idea how exactly the Cascadia subduction zone works, because we discovered it in 1970. This zone is super scary because it can cause big earthquakes. It was found by accident when researchers studied the Ring of Fire. They wanted to know if this area had caused any trouble in the past years, and the proof was under their noses. In Washington, there is a horror forest where nothing has been growing for years. When researchers tested the soil, they found a tremendous amount of salt. They put 2 and 2 together and concluded that a massive tsunami had been the reason. Experts still didn't know when the forest was destroyed, but Japan kept records of a gigantic earthquake that had a similar effect. It was the one that happened in the year 1700. There is a 1 in 3 chance that the next one will occur in 2050. You must know how to survive the Canadian earthquakes and make it out unscathed, so listen carefully. Those who live in this area have almost no experience with earthquakes like this one. Surviving the quake is relatively easy, but the tsunami coming afterwards is the real danger. After the shake, find the highest ground and go there. Only bring the essentials, like food and water. Yeah, leave your baseball card collection at home. After the first hit, don't try to go down. Seismologists say that most likely there will be a few more waves, and they have proven this. On the 22nd of May 1960, seismologist Jerry Eston and his 4 friends went to Hawaii to see an expected tsunami that was to happen around midnight. They set up their gear on Wailuku Bridge with an escape route planned. This bridge had been destroyed in the previous tsunami, but the new one was much taller and better. After midnight, the water was 4 feet above the average level. The second wave hit a half hour after midnight, and the water rose another 9 feet by 1 a.m. The water started going down and dropped by 7 feet, but the horror was far from over. Next, they saw a wave that was around 20 feet tall. This shows us that tsunamis are unpredictable, and we should listen to experts to stay safe.
We are on the Sea of Marmara, the exact spot where the massive continents of Europe and Asia meet. It's a vital, beautiful waterway packed with cargo ships on the surface, but dive underneath and you'll find a geographical nightmare lying on the seafloor. Deep underwater, 2 massive slabs of the Earth's crust are violently grinding past each other. This isn't just a minor crack in the dirt, it's a colossal geological fault. A massive complex system of continuous fractures that has been accumulating a devastating amount of energy for decades. We call it the Great North Anatolian Fault. All this energy has to be unleashed someday. And when it happens, it's going to hit one of the most densely populated areas on our planet. Scientists are now in active monitoring mode, especially when it comes to Turkey. This country is sitting on the Anatolian Plate, a small bite of the Earth's crust. Nowadays, it's being literally smashed by the Arabian Plate from the south and the Eurasian Plate from the north. Because it's being squeezed so hard, the only direction it can move is west toward the Aegean Sea, and it actually does this at a speed of about 1 inch per year. In geological terms, that's a high-speed, violent movement. Millions of tons of solid rock grinding against each other deep underground day and night without a single break? Not the best thing to experience. All this endless moving, cracking, and squeezing is what creates the North Anatolian Fault, a 930-mile-long fault line that acts almost exactly like the infamous San Andreas Fault. Yet the difference is striking. While the San Andreas mostly skirts the outer edges of Californian megacities or runs through less dense regions, the fault in Turkey is running right under major industrial hubs and heavily populated urban centers. In February 2023, the smaller sister of it, the East Anatolian Fault, showed us how dangerous this tectonic setup can be. It generated the most catastrophic earthquake recorded in Turkey in over 60 years. A brutal 7.8 monster hit and a 7.5 shockwave followed right behind it just hours later. The release of energy was so violent that the ground literally moved by almost 10 feet in some places. Entire cities were leveled and the physical map of the region permanently shifted. Now the worst part, it wasn't even the grand finale. There's no way to stop that energy packed inside the North Anatolian Faults. Look at the old data and you'll see it acts like clockwork, a bit like a line of falling dominoes. Scientists have been tracking every sequence of earthquakes in this region for nearly a century. The whole chain reaction started in 1939 with the catastrophic Erzincan earthquake. A massive magnitude 7.8 struck eastern Turkey. It didn't simply release the energy, but also transferred this tectonic stress into the next section of the fault. Dominoes started falling. Other fault ruptured happened in 1942, 1943, and 1944. It went west and struck again in 1957 and 1967. Year by year, the epicenters of these massive earthquakes moved in a straight line toward the Sea of Marmara. The last major impact was the Izmit earthquake in 1999. A magnitude 7.6 tremor struck east of Istanbul and lasted for 37 terrifying seconds. Suddenly, the chain reaction took a break, but the tectonic stress was still there, simply transferred to the next section of the fault, under the Sea of Marmara, where the last major earthquake took place in 1766. Nobody had seismographs back then, but historical records and old journals describe it as a scene of unimaginable horror. Now, modern science tells us exactly why it was so devastating. Scientists are calling it a seismic gap, basically a dangerously quiet zone that hasn't ruptured yet. Back then, 260 years ago, a massive quake destroyed a huge part of Istanbul and generated a tsunami that crashed into the city's ports. After this tragedy, it didn't happen again on this scale, but we have to remember that the Anatolian plate has never stopped moving west, an inch a year. Let's do some quick math. That land should have moved by over 19 feet by now, but because those rocks are locked together, they haven't moved an inch. We are looking at a massive backlog of tectonic tension. It simply has to snap finally, and it won't make a regular shake. It will likely rapidly release 2.5 centuries of accumulated tectonic energy, right at the doorstep of Europe and Asia. The target is the city of Istanbul once again. We should call it a supercity because this global mega hub is home to an astonishing 15 million people. It accounts for nearly 30% of Turkey's entire economic output. What about the infrastructure? We're talking about 1 million buildings, and an estimated 90,000 of those are at high risk of total collapse in the event of a magnitude 7.5 earthquake. Nowadays, the city has very strict laws for modern buildings. But plenty of urban areas had been built before those regulations were enforced. To make matters worse, many coastal neighborhoods are built on soft, waterlogged soil that acts like a liquid during extreme shaking, multiplying the danger for the residents. Buildings could just sink into quicksand. And there's more. The seafloor of the Marmara Sea isn't flat. There are 3 massive deep underwater holes separated by vast ridges. Why is it important? A stronger earthquake in this area will probably trigger a massive submarine landslide. Plenty of mud and rock collapsing down those underwater canyons would instantly displace massive amounts of water. This would trigger a tsunami, not as tall as mega tsunamis in the open Pacific Ocean, but still highly dangerous. It's estimated that with a 10-foot wall of water, it will be extremely dangerous for this densely populated area. Scientists also claim that it could hit the coastline within 10 minutes. There would be almost no time for a mass evacuation. Here comes modern technology. Engineers are fully aware that this geographical clock is ticking and are fighting back. Essentially, infrastructure is being heavily retrofitted. Also, the mighty bridges crossing the Bosphorus Strait have been reinforced with seismic dampers to absorb extreme shocks. One of the world's largest seismically isolated buildings is located at Sabiha Gökçen International Airport in Istanbul. It's sitting on massive bearings made out of rubber and steel. The absolute art of engineering is the Marmara Tunnel, a massive railway tube that runs directly under the Bosphorus Strait, physically connecting the European and Asian continents underwater. It was built right next to an active fault line, so it had to be designed with flexible earthquake-proof joints. If a megaquake hits and the continents shift, the tunnel will bend and flex like a giant snake rather than snapping in half. Another concern of scientists is the economic aftershock of this rupture. It may affect the entire globe, as the Bosphorus Strait is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Every single year, nearly 50,000 ships pass through this narrow waterway, carrying everything that is crucial for the global market: barrels of oil, agricultural goods, and so on. The price of energy and food would go crazy if this shipping line collapses. To buy some precious time, scientists have installed an advanced early warning network on the seafloor of the Marmara Sea. Fiber optic cables and seismometers are constantly listening to the fault. But because the epicenter is located so incredibly close to the city, even this multi-million-dollar system won't give residents enough time to escape. At best, it will provide a maximum of 5 to 7 seconds of warning before the destructive waves hit the city. 5 seconds to shut down gas lines, halt the trains, and brace for the impact. Of course, all this effort won't protect the whole city. Only a fraction will survive. The undeniable conclusion is that the migration of earthquakes isn't just a theory, but a well-documented geographical reality. Scientists estimate that there is a 65% probability of a magnitude 7 or greater earthquake striking the Sea of Marmara region before the year 2030. Now we can see that the rupture in this area isn't just a possibility. It is coming, and it is migrating directly toward the collision point of 2 continents.
There is a powerful force hiding underground where tectonic plates meet, and one forces another under it. This happens in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Strain builds over centuries. The tension is unbearable until the megathrust awakens. The Earth shakes with a magnitude that can exceed 9 points, more powerful than any other earthquake. When the seafloor suddenly gets pushed up fast, it sends a huge ripple across the water, and a tsunami of huge force is out. These waves are called teletsunamis, and they cross entire ocean basins, ready to take over coastlines thousands of miles away. The thrust fault stretches over 600 miles. The Earth is not just shaking, it feels like it's tearing apart. This is the power of a megathrust earthquake. Those caught in its path will have to fight for their lives. Japanese authorities recently had to issue their first ever Megaquake advisory. It happened because of a strong tremor on the edge of the Nankai Trough ocean floor zone. In the end, most of the warnings were lifted, and there wasn't much damage from the 7.1 magnitude earthquake. Parts of southwestern Japan started to shake, and the superfast trains in Japan slowed down to stay safe, which made travel slower for everyone. But everyone is staying alert as they know about the risk of a megathrust earthquake that could happen within the next few decades in the Nankai Trough. The tectonic plate under the Philippine Sea is slowly sliding underneath the land where Japan is, moving just a few inches every year. The last big earthquakes from this area happened in 1944 and 1946, both with a magnitude of 8.1. These quakes have caused a lot of destruction in the country. The next megathrust earthquake in the region, if it does happen, could be between a magnitude 8 and 9. Scientists still can't agree on how likely this mega earthquake is to happen, but it could be up to 80% certainty. On the other side of the Pacific, scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey have studied a dangerous area along the U.S. West Coast. It's called the Cascadia subduction zone, and it stretches from northern California to northern Vancouver Island in Canada. Over the past 14,200 years, there have likely been at least 30 big earthquakes in this region. One major quake happens every 500 years on average. But for a long time now, Cascadia has been quiet, and it worries scientists. They think this might be because the area is locked, meaning the tectonic plates are stuck together and building up a lot of pressure. Eventually, the part of the seafloor could suddenly break and move by several feet. The shaking would be just 5 minutes, but it would create a powerful tsunami as the seafloor shifts that would last for 10 hours. If it happens, it's going to be the worst natural disaster in the country's history, according to experts. The ground on some inland hills could turn into something like quicksand. This would cause the hillsides to slide and crumble, taking down roads and bridges. Around 620,000 buildings could be badly damaged or even collapse, including about 100 hospitals and 2,000 schools. People in Washington state might have to take care of themselves without help for 2 weeks, finding food, water, and shelter on their own. Scientists are studying slow slip events, where the tectonic plates move very slowly over weeks or months, releasing some energy but not enough to stop a big one. Every time the magnitude of an earthquake goes up by just one number, the energy it releases is 40 times bigger. So we'd need about 1 million small earthquakes every day for 500 years straight to release the same energy as one huge magnitude 9 earthquake. But these small earthquakes might be clues that a bigger earthquake is coming. To better monitor the Cascadia fault, experts are mapping the fault more accurately and adding better monitoring tools offshore. Scientists receive over $10 million to install seismic sensors and seafloor pressure gauges on a fiber optic cable off the coast of Oregon. The goal is to be ready to warn people and potentially save lives when a big earthquake strikes. A sharp megathrust earthquake happened in this part of the world in 1964. It went down in history as the Great Alaska Earthquake and had a magnitude of 9.2. It lasted for more than 4 minutes, making it the most powerful earthquake in the history of the U.S. and North America. The ground shook so hard that it caused huge cracks and landslides. In Anchorage, many houses, buildings, and roads were destroyed because they weren't built to handle such a big earthquake. In some places, the land was permanently changed. For example, the coastline near Kodiak and Hinchinbrook Island was lifted by 30 feet. In other areas, like Gerwood and Portage, the ground sank by 8 feet. They had to rebuild roads higher so they wouldn't be flooded by the time. A huge 27-foot tsunami wiped out the entire village of Chiniga. Many coastal towns were heavily damaged, not just by the earthquake, but also by tsunamis and the fires that followed. After the main earthquake, there were thousands of smaller aftershocks for months. A moderate earthquake of magnitude 4.4 shook Los Angeles in August 2024. Once it was over, the LA Fire Department checked around the city and didn't find any major damage or anyone hurt. In the nearby city of Pasadena, which is close to the earthquake's epicenter, a water pipe burst inside City Hall and everyone had to leave the building. Thankfully, there was no danger of a tsunami. The best we can do to avoid panic in such situations is to be prepared. Japan is one of the places on Earth where earthquakes happen the most because it sits on the edges of 4 tectonic plates. Around 1,500 of these earthquakes each year are noticeable. Because of this, the people in Japan have learned to live with earthquakes. The 1950 law set a rule that buildings should be able to handle earthquakes up to a magnitude 7 without falling apart. An update 30 years later said that buildings should only have minor damage in such earthquakes and still work as usual. But if an earthquake is even stronger, the law says the building's main job is to not collapse and save people's lives. At the most basic level, buildings are made stronger with thicker beams, pillars, and walls so they can handle shaking better. Another technique is placing special pads made from materials like rubber at the base of a building. Some buildings are even built on thick layers of padding that separate them from the ground completely, which helps protect them during an earthquake. A skyscraper might sway back and forth a lot, moving up to 5 feet. To stop it from getting damaged, engineers can add something called dampers every second floor all the way to the top. These dampers are like giant bicycle pumps, but instead of air, they're filled with liquid. When the building shakes, the dampers push against the liquid inside them. Even though the liquid doesn't squish very much, it can still absorb some of the shaking. When they're building tall skyscrapers, engineers try to make the structure as simple and balanced as possible. This means having each floor the same height and placing the support columns evenly. But sometimes, architects who design skyscrapers don't want to make these compromises because they have creative ideas for how the building should look. Then they have to find compromise solutions. For example, Tokyo's Skytree Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the world, is designed in a futuristic style but also includes special features to protect it from earthquakes. It has a central pillar, like in traditional Japanese pagodas, and seismic dampers that help absorb the energy from an earthquake, keeping the building safe.
Scientists just found out that the Earth's crust beneath the Marmara Sea is sending seismic signals that look exactly like the kind that show up before a major earthquake. An earthquake that can shake entire coastlines and send waves racing toward crowded cities. For years, scientists focused on visible ruptures on land because they could measure and map them easily. But now, they made a detailed map of a huge fault system under the seafloor. The Mediterranean already sits at a dangerous crossroads where massive tectonic plates meet. Those plates push, scrape, and stretch against each other, and that constant motion creates massive stress. The crust there grows thinner over time, and thinner crust means it can't absorb stress easily. Stress builds, pressure mounts, and the signals coming from below show that parts of this fault system have started to move in unusual ways. The new map shows that future large earthquakes may begin at the boundaries where weaker and stronger sections of the crust meet, or along edges of highly resistive zones. They even pinpointed one of the most likely locations, beneath the Marmara Sea. What makes this discovery so intense is the scale. The faults in the seabed form long corridors where energy can accumulate for decades or centuries. Scientists warn that this setup is the kind that can produce a super earthquake, a massive seismic event capable of shaking large coastal cities and possibly generating tsunamis. A tsunami forms when the seafloor shifts vertically and displaces huge amounts of water, so it looks really plausible in this setting. The water it sets free radiates outward in powerful waves that can cross entire seas. The Mediterranean holds dozens of densely populated shorelines, so it could affect millions of lives. Speaking of that, let's zoom in on Istanbul, Turkey's largest and most populous city. The massive fault line sitting right under it doesn't act the way scientists thought it did. For years, experts looked at the main Marmara Fault, a branch of the North Anatolian Fault running beneath the Sea of Marmara, and worried it might rip in one single monstrous rupture. That kind of break could unleash a megaquake in the high 7s or beyond. But when scientists ran detailed computer simulations covering more than 10,000 years of earthquake cycles, they saw something different. The fault doesn't behave like one giant zipper waiting to unzip all at once. It behaves more like a row of connected tiles that break in sections. And the reason comes down to what's happening miles below the seafloor. It's called rheology. Simply put, how materials deform under stress, how rocks bend, stretch, or snap when you squeeze them hard enough. Under the central Sea of Marmara, giant piles of compacted mud, sand, and debris sit on top of warmer crust. In those upper layers, the sediment usually deforms slowly and steadily, especially at shallow depths where pressure and heat interact in specific ways. Deeper down, higher temperatures weaken the rocks. Warm rock flows more easily than cold rock. That heat acts like a built-in brake system that limits how far a rupture can tear through the crust. When researchers built a 3D earthquake cycle model, they fed in real heat flow measurements, rock friction data, and structural details, and replayed thousands of years of seismic activity. When they included both sediment thickness and temperature differences, the model finally matched history, including the powerful quakes of 1766 and 1912. And none of the simulated events exceeded magnitude 7.3. That level of shaking can collapse buildings, fracture infrastructure, and cause landslides. But it differs from the nightmare scenario of one continuous coast-to-coast rupture. Instead, different sections behave in different ways. The western segments produce more regular earthquakes, including magnitude 7.2 events roughly every 150 years. The eastern sections generate smaller double quakes, back-to-back events between magnitude 6.2 and 6.8 about every century, and a magnitude 7.0 roughly every 500 years. Parts of the fault don't snap at all, but creep. Scientists call it shallow creep, which just means the fault slowly slides without producing a major quake. It releases tension quietly, like letting air out of a balloon instead of popping it. GPS measurements and clusters of repeating small quakes over the past 20 years confirm that slow slip near the central basin. So what does this mean for Istanbul, a city of over 15 million people sitting practically on top of this system? A magnitude 7 or 7.3 quake close to the city could still rock neighborhoods, especially if two strong events strike in quick succession. Infrastructure, older buildings, and densely packed districts are at the highest risk. The fault hasn't produced a major rupture in this section since 1894, which means there's more than 130 years of accumulated strain. The simulations show major events could strike in the coming decades. Then there's Santorini, where more than 28,000 earthquakes happened in just a few months in early 2025. Most of the quakes stayed small, but some reached magnitude 5, strong enough to fracture walls, rattle nerves, and push authorities to close schools and evacuate parts of the island. And this wasn't just tectonic plates grinding like they usually do. This swarm moved. The epicenters shifted gradually northeast toward the Colombo submarine volcano about 5 miles offshore. That migration told scientists magma was on the move. Researchers calculated that roughly 80 billion gallons of it, enough to fill about 120,000 Olympic swimming pools, surged upward from depths around 11 miles beneath the surface. It climbed fast, then stalled about 2 to 2.5 miles below the seafloor. And all this was going on along the Hellenic Arc, one of Europe's most active subduction zones, where the African plate dives beneath the Eurasian region. Earthquakes often migrate across that span toward nearby islands. History backs that up. The 1956 Amorgos earthquakes unleashed massive shaking and a tsunami across the region. So, when 28,000 tremors light up the seismic network, you pay attention. This episode changed how scientists understand volcanic swarms. Now they know magma can intrude, fracture miles of crust, reshape underground reservoirs, and still never surface. It can load the system for the future without pulling the trigger today. And that matters because when magma moves like this, it changes stress fields underground and how future quakes might breed. The good news is that scientists now have really cool monitoring tools that feed real-time seismic feeds, underwater pressure sensors, and repeated gas measurements near volcanic vents into integrated hazard models. If magma starts accelerating upward again, researchers will see it and will take action. And there's another bold new idea in earthquake and tsunami warning: using undersea internet cables for this purpose. Nearly 1 million miles of those fiber optic lines on the seabed were designed to carry data, but scientists discovered that they can also detect tiny changes in light signals caused by seismic vibrations. In simple terms, when the ground shakes, the cable feels it. And this could be incredibly useful because forecasting earthquakes, even on land, is tricky. In the ocean, it has felt almost impossible as you can't scatter thousands of sensors across the seafloor easily. But those cables already sit there, stretching across deep trenches and continental shelves. If researchers use them as sensors, they can monitor tectonic movement in real time across huge areas. For a region like the Mediterranean, with hidden faults, active volcanoes, and crowded coasts, that system could offer precious seconds or minutes of warning. Seconds sound small, but early alerts let trains stop, gas lines shut down, and people move away from immediate danger. The fiber optic cable used for Seafloor Project, or FOCUS in the short version, didn't warn anyone about real disasters yet, but it had 2 false alarms. It reacted to a submarine landslide and weight bags that pushed the cables down. It proves the system works and could be life-saving in case of real danger, especially in vulnerable regions such as the Mediterranean. It shaped civilizations for thousands of years, and now science reveals it still shapes itself. They can't stop tectonic plates or cool magma chambers, but they can understand patterns, reduce vulnerability, and design cities smarter.
Get ready, because one of the Pacific Ocean's most active volcanoes might blow any minute now. Scientists monitoring axial seamount, a gigantic underwater lava factory just off the coast of Oregon, say it could erupt literally any time between today and early 2026 at the latest. Yes, it's underwater, but don't get tricked by the ocean's cover. This beast is almost 3 times taller than the Empire State Building. This volcano is inflating like a souffle at a Michelin-starred restaurant, and scientists are so excited they will live stream it. Seriously! So here's the thing. This volcano will explode at any moment now because, well, it's inflating fast. Over the past few months, researchers have noticed that the seafloor is literally rising. It's like Axial is doing its best impression of a waterbed filled with molten rock. Scientists call this inflation, which sounds like something you'd complain about after Thanksgiving dinner. But in volcano terms, it means magma is piling up underground, causing the seafloor to bulge like a souffle that's this close to collapsing. Now, an underwater volcanic eruption might not sound so exotic. After all, most volcanic activity on Earth happens under the sea. Believe it or not, there are more than 1 million submarine volcanoes quietly churning lava beneath the waves as you watch this. The ocean floor is Earth's biggest volcanic hotspot. What makes axial seamount so thrilling is that it's under intense scientific surveillance, unlike any other underwater volcano. It's like the star player in a volcanic reality show, with a network of ocean-bottom instruments giving researchers real-time updates on magma movements, seismic tremors, and crust deformation. In fact, Axial Seamount hosts the world's first-ever underwater volcanic laboratory. Scientists have been keeping a constant eye on it since the 1990s, when they installed sensors that now relay live data straight from the seafloor. This kind of monitoring is unheard of elsewhere and has turned Axial into a geological celebrity, one whose behavior we can track with remarkable precision. Besides, Axial is hilariously predictable. It erupts roughly every decade, and right on cue, it's gearing up for another performance. By mid-2024, it had inflated to nearly the same level as before its last eruption, which means the countdown is on. Scientists are so confident in its schedule that they've set up a volcanic advent calendar, waiting for the day when Axial decides to pop. But hold on, Axial Seamount isn't just your average underwater volcano. It's got style, personality, and a geological identity of its own. Now, most underwater volcanoes, called seamounts, tend to look like cones or flattened domes. Axial laughs in the face of tradition with its unfashionably rectangular caldera, a 2-by-5-mile crater that looks like it was designed by a geologist with a ruler and a grudge against curves. Most volcanoes opt for the classic circular look, but Axial, it went full avant-garde. This caldera is punctuated by fissures, vents, lava channels, and mysterious dome-like structures that rise hundreds of feet high. It's like the volcano's wearing a funky geometrical crown instead of the usual rounded hat. What's more, Axial's location is like prime real estate for geological fireworks. It sits right where 2 major forces collide, literally. First, it's on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, an underwater mountain range formed where 2 tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart, like a zipper being undone. Second, it's perched atop the Cobb Hotspot, a deep mantle plume that acts like Earth's sneaky magma espresso machine, pumping molten rock from deep inside the planet and fueling a whole chain of seamounts. To put it plainly, it's like the tectonic plates are reluctant dance partners, sliding away from each other, while the Cobb Hotspot acts as the DJ, turning up the heat and keeping the magma party going. This dual influence creates a complex plumbing system inside the volcano, with magma chambers filling, draining, and shifting in ways scientists are still trying to decode. The competition between the spreading plates and upwelling magma is what gives Axial its unique geological fingerprint, and it's also why this volcano keeps surprising us. Now, we said that Axial Summit isn't just a crater. The truth is that inside, the action gets even weirder and cooler, well, hotter, but you get it. Axial hosts black smoker hydrothermal vents, which blast superheated water at temperatures exceeding 700 degrees Fahrenheit. This is no ordinary underwater hot tub. These vents create one of Earth's most extreme environments, where bizarre creatures thrive in total darkness and scalding heat. Giant tube worms, crabs, colonies of bacteria, and even octopuses live off the mineral-rich plumes that gush from these vents. forming ecosystems completely independent from sunlight and photosynthesis. It's like an alien world beneath the waves, thriving off the volcano's fiery breath. These vent communities are crucial to science, not just because they're strange, but because they may resemble the earliest ecosystems on Earth. Some researchers believe life on our planet may have originated in similar deep-sea hydrothermal environments billions of years ago. Studying them could also help us search for life on icy moons, like Europa and Enceladus, where similar vents might exist beneath their frozen surfaces. When axial erupts, it's like a natural reset button for these communities. The lava wipes everything out, but within months, life comes roaring back. Proof that even in the most hostile environments, real estate is always in demand. For those worrying about tsunamis or coastal disasters, relax. Axial eruptions are the underwater equivalent of a slow cooker. The immense water pressure keeps things chill, well, scalding, but not explosive. So the worst thing that happens is some lava decorates the seafloor, and a few crabs have to find new vents to squat in. This means no massive ash clouds or explosive blasts that could reach the surface. Instead, lava oozes out and spreads across the seafloor, sometimes traveling for miles. But for scientists, this eruption is the golden ticket. Understanding axial patterns could help predict eruptions elsewhere, even on land. Plus, its bizarre ecosystems offer clues about how life might survive on other planets. Not bad for a volcano that mostly just sits around looking rectangular. Still, the volcano's activity can be heard in the form of thousands of small earthquakes every day. Thousands! As if the volcano itself was groaning and creaking, preparing to burst open. Again, we won't feel a thing, but at least they'll help scientists track the magma's movements and the volcano's eruptive cycle. Now, one of the coolest parts of this story is that scientists are preparing to live-stream Axial's next eruption for the first time ever. Imagine watching an undersea volcano in action, live, as it's painting the ocean floor with fresh lava. It's like a front row seat to a natural fireworks display, thousands of feet beneath the waves. The livestream will come courtesy of the Ocean Observatory's initiative, which maintains a series of fiber optic cables linking Axial's instruments directly to shore. It's the Wi-Fi of the deep sea, and it's about to broadcast molten rock in HD. And there's another twist. Scientists have noticed a curious pattern in Axial's eruptions. All three of its most recent eruptions, in 1998, 2011, and 2015, happened between January and April, the months when Earth starts moving away from the Sun. So why? Well, it might have something to do with the Moon's gravitational pull. The Moon's orbit causes ocean tides to rise and fall, which changes the pressure on the seafloor and could help nudge the magma chamber to its breaking point. I guess the Moon isn't just a romantic light in the night sky. It might be the ultimate volcanic whisperer. So, one thing's for sure, when Axial goes, it'll be the best documented underwater eruption in history. So, keep your eyes peeled. This is one natural spectacle you won't want to miss. And who knows, if we're lucky, we might even get deep-sea eruption ASMR out of the deal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be refreshing the live feed like it's a Taylor Swift ticket sale. If all the volcanoes on Earth suddenly erupted together, it'd be loud. We'd also have around 1,500 of these formations bursting at once. Now, normally it's just 10 to 20 volcanoes that are active each day. But what would the world look like if they all blew their tops simultaneously? Geologists think it wouldn't be pretty. Even if only the land volcanoes erupted together, it would set off a chain reaction way worse than anything we've ever seen before. The two big problems would be ash and volcanic gases. While the explosions in lava would be damaging for people nearby, the real danger lies in what happens next. A thick layer of ash would cover the planet, blocking out sunlight completely. No sunlight means no photosynthesis, which means crops would fade away and temperatures would drop considerably. And all this ash cloud could remain in our atmosphere for up to 10 years. Now, ash aside, there's also acid rain to worry about. Volcanic gases like hydrochloric acid and sulfur dioxide would mix with the atmosphere and fall back down as acid rain. This type of weather would harm the groundwater and ocean surfaces. Even if humans would find a way to survive up to this point, we'd have no corals and no other sea creatures around. Scientists have seen similar events in Earth's history at a smaller scale. Big volcanic eruptions have been linked to mass extinctions. When Mount Pinatubo erupted in 1991, it cooled parts of the world for 2 years. But the extra carbon dioxide from these eruptions could also heat the planet, the same way we turn our stoves to broil for that extra crispy layer on our casserole. Geologists also mentioned that there's evidence in our atmosphere that stuff like this may have happened in the distant past. During the Cretaceous period, carbon dioxide levels were way higher than today, which made it difficult for marine life to thrive. Who would survive all this? Probably just some extremophiles, these organisms that survive in harsh conditions like hot springs or deep undersea vents. As for humans, we could all lay low in underground bunkers until things clear up, or build multiple space stations that could fit us all. Yeah, right. The chances of all volcanoes erupting at once, though, are very slim. Whew! That's because there isn't one giant source supplying all the volcanoes on Earth. Each one of these openings has its own deposit of magma, except for a few cases where they indeed share the supply. For example, in 1912, Nova Rupta in Alaska erupted alongside another volcano sharing magma. Scientists have also found evidence of magma hiding under volcanic areas, like under the Taupau volcanic zone in New Zealand. This magma can spread out horizontally for long distances, but is still just a local feature. Even if we consider all the magma under Taupau as one system, it's not connected to other volcanic areas like Indonesia or the Philippines. Because the great majority are isolated, volcanoes can't sync up to erupt at once. The magma comes from different processes like mantle decompression or adding water to the mantle through subduction. There's no way to make all these different volcanoes erupt together because of how tectonics work. Now, that doesn't mean we won't see interesting volcano activity in the future. Take an underwater area near British Columbia, where recently about 200 small earthquakes per hour have been noted. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean floor, off the coast of Vancouver Island, magma is set to erupt, heating the water so much that it'll bubble like soda. However, this event will likely go unnoticed by anyone other than scientists. The anticipated eruption will most likely happen around 3 miles below the ocean surface. Scientists explain that the earthquakes range from negative to 4.1 magnitude, meaning only those nearby would feel any tremors. This unusual activity gives us a rare opportunity to study how the Earth's crust forms. The magma beneath the ocean floor is estimated to be almost 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, but will cool rapidly upon eruption and contact with water. This runny rock will solidify upon contact with the seafloor, turning black quickly. This event will be useful for biologists too, who will have the opportunity to study the marine animals' response to any changes, like run! Antarctica, often seen as a vast icy continent, also holds a volcanic surprise beneath its frozen surface. Researchers have identified over 130 under the western ice sheet alone, making it the largest volcanic region on Earth. Most of these volcanoes, about 90, were only recently discovered in 2017. But could any of these Antarctic volcanoes actually erupt? Well, it depends on which volcano we're talking about. While these formations are relatively young in geologic terms, it's hard for scientists to tell if they're still active or not. There are only 2 confirmed active volcanoes in Antarctica, Deception Island and Mount Erebus. The latter, standing tall as the highest peak on the continent, has been continuously erupting since at least 1972. It's known for emitting gas and steam, and sometimes even throwing out rocks in what are called strombolian eruptions. One of its most notable features is a persistent lava lake in its crater, a rare phenomenon due to specific conditions needed to keep the surface molten. For instance, it's fueled by a steady supply of magma from deep within the Earth's mantle. This continuous inflow of molten rock provides the material for the lava lake to exist. It also features low ambient temperatures. Despite its location in Antarctica, Erebus has relatively mild temperatures in its summit region because of the heat generated by the volcanic activity. This allows the lava lake to remain liquid rather than freezing over. Deception Island, another active volcano, last erupted in the 70s. While it's currently not showing signs of imminent eruption, it's being monitored closely for any concerning activity. Apart from these two being confirmed to be active, Antarctica is dotted with fumaroles, openings in the Earth's crust that release gases and vapors. Sometimes these fumaroles can create icy towers reaching heights of 10 feet. What we should focus on is maybe supervolcanoes. They're this type that has the potential to produce the most massive and destructive eruptions. Unlike the typical one, which has a single vent, supervolcanoes have a vast magma chamber beneath the surface, spanning tens or even hundreds of miles in diameter. Their eruptions can have catastrophic effects on the surrounding area and even impact global climate patterns because of the amounts of ash and gases they spill out into the atmosphere. One famous supervolcano is the Yellowstone one, which some say is gearing up for another eruption. It has the capacity to unleash a colossal eruption, spewing over 240 cubic miles of material. As much as we'd like to predict its behavior, volcanoes don't stick to a calendar. On the contrary, eruptions simply happen when there's enough magma beneath the surface. There also needs to be enough pressure for the magma to travel upwards. As far as we can measure, these conditions are not currently met at Yellowstone. Sure, many volcanoes operate on a cyclical pattern, but that doesn't mean Yellowstone is overdue. In fact, Yellowstone has had just 3 major eruptions over the past 2.1 million years. Also, the term supervolcano refers to the formation's size, not necessarily how fussy it is. Yellowstone's monitoring is extensive, tracking seismicity, ground deformation, thermal emissions, gas, water chemistry, and surface changes. Signs of an eruption would include thousands of earthquakes over a short period. We'd also see deformation on the ground and weird gas emissions ahead of time. Stable, as it might look like for now, the consequences of it having a major eruption could look ugly. Ash dispersion could blanket a 500-mile radius, potentially disrupting Midwest agriculture and clogging waterways. Ash and gas emissions into the stratosphere could induce global climatic effects, making our planet colder for several years. And yes, we've seen some research that it shows there's more liquid molten rock under the Yellowstone volcano than scientists believe. But that doesn't translate to imminent danger.
The snowpack over your head splits in two right in front of your eyes and starts tumbling down in the frozen slope to its resting place far, far below. Anything in its way is crushed under the immense mass of snow and debris. You're witnessing an avalanche, one of the most dangerous natural disasters. But what if I tell you about another kind of avalanche, no less blood-chilling than the mountain one? And the most bizarre thing about it is that it occurs underwater. Underwater avalanches are powerful and disastrous natural phenomena, often much more dangerous than land ones. They have the potential to wreak havoc on the entire planet, leading to catastrophic consequences. The most alarming thing? They occur all the time under the surface of the ocean, impossible to see, predict, and extremely difficult to measure. Such avalanches can get 100 times larger than land ones, and they pose a great risk to the world's communications, capable of leaving the entire planet without the internet. But we'll talk about it a bit later. First, let's go 60,000 years back into the past. We're near the northwest coast of Africa, ready to witness the colossal scale and devastating impact of a ginormous underwater avalanche. It started as a quite small underwater landslide in the Agadir Canyon. At first, it was just 0.35 cubic miles of material, but in no time, this mass increased more than 100 times in size while traveling across the Atlantic Ocean floor. As the avalanche sped up and grew, it picked up gravel, sand, rocks, and mud. It carved a devastating path through one of the world's largest submarine canyons, wiping out all forms of animal and plant life on its way. The disastrous flow was so powerful that it literally eroded a 250-mile stretch of the canyon, cutting hundreds of feet into its sides and damaging a total area of 1,740 square miles. That's the area of more than 3.5 New York cities. As for the force of the flow, it was so immense that it propelled massive boulders up the canyon walls to heights of up to 430 feet. Before scientists discovered the evidence of this catastrophic event, they had seriously underestimated the scale of destruction caused by submarine avalanches. By the way, these devastating catastrophes can start not only far away in the ocean, but also at estuaries. Let's go back to 14 January 2020 and see for ourselves. A turbidity current, a rapid, downhill flow of water containing a lot of sediment, rushed more than 680 miles from the Congo River estuary in the deep sea. This current appeared due to two factors: terrible flooding along the Congo River in late December 2019 and unusually large spring tides. This resulted in an avalanche of sand and mud. Its volume was equivalent to 1/3 of all the sediment produced annually by all the rivers in the world. This sediment avalanche accelerated, increasing in speed from 17 feet per second in the upper part of the Congo Canyon to 26 feet per second when it reached the end of the channel, almost 700 miles away from the coastline. This route made it the longest avalanche of sediment ever measured on our planet. 2 days later, the flow reached the deep ocean. The avalanche broke 2 seabed telecommunication cables, cutting internet data speeds all the way across West, Central, and South Africa. Now, before this disaster, scientists considered that measuring powerful deep-sea avalanches was impractical. But the sediment flow in the Congo Canyon could be monitored directly, finally allowing researchers to assess how major river floods connected to the deep sea. They also concluded that how often underwater avalanches occurred depended on where the observer was. Seafloor canyons that are close to river mouths can experience several tiny avalanches per year. Other systems, far from river discharges like the Agadir Canyon, can only have one monster of an avalanche every 10,000 years or so. You're likely wondering, what can trigger an avalanche under the surface of the ocean? Well, earthquakes, typhoons, high tides, river floods, and even volcanic eruptions. And due to our changing climate, such events become more and more frequent and intense. At the same time, these triggers don't mean that an avalanche is bound to happen, nor do they relate to the scale of the event. See for yourself. In 1755, a powerful earthquake hit the coast of Portugal, wiping out large parts of Lisbon. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives during that disaster, but it only triggered a tiny underwater avalanche. And in 1929, a large earthquake off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, triggered the largest underwater avalanche ever recorded. The flow traveled at a speed of 42 miles per hour, carrying boulders, sand, and mud. It snapped 11 seabed cables on its journey downhill. The avalanche was so powerful, it produced a tsunami that claimed the lives of 28 people along the coastline. Now, submarine avalanches are totally invisible because they happen deep under the ocean surface, which makes them extremely hard to study. But we must find a way because these flows are super important. They transport sediments, nutrients, and even pollutants across the ocean floor. So, a research team from Liverpool decided to unravel this mystery. Over the last 40 years, they've collected more than 300 samples from the ocean floor. Combined with seismic and bathymetric data, which is a fancy word for ocean mapping, they managed to reconstruct a massive submarine avalanche. It was the first time an underwater avalanche of this size was mapped out. An even cooler thing, the event itself started off pretty modestly, but it quickly evolved into a colossal avalanche that grew to more than 650 feet tall. To put that into perspective, imagine a skyscraper-sized avalanche zooming from Liverpool to London, cutting a trench 100 feet deep and 9 miles wide. Then it's spread out over an area bigger than the UK, covering it with several feet of sand and mud. That's like burying a whole country. These findings are actually a big deal because they show that even a small underwater landslide can turn into something massive and super destructive. But that's not the worst. Think about undersea internet cables, which are essential for global communication. There are more than 550 active seafloor cables around the world. Their combined length is a whopping 870,000 miles. That's enough to wrap around our planet 35 times. When a submarine avalanche breaks seafloor cables, the effects are usually super expensive and devastating. For example, in 2006, an earthquake in Taiwan triggered underwater avalanches that cut loads of seafloor cables connecting Southeast Asia with the rest of the world. The largest internet operator in China had a 90% loss of traffic to the USA at the peak of the event. As for Taiwan itself, it experienced between 74 to 100% loss in traffic to neighboring islands. So now you probably get why we need to learn more about this natural phenomenon. Luckily, researchers at Tulane University have found a way to study it in 3D. Previous studies only looked at submarine avalanches in 2D, which didn't give the full picture of how they actually behaved. The new research focused on how underwater flows interacted with mini basins, natural features on the ocean floor that look like shallow bowls. Despite being called mini, these bowls can be huge, up to 4 square miles. When turbidity currents flow into these mini basins, they don't just stop. No, they hit the far side and curl back around like water eddies in a stream. These swirling flows move the sediment around before it settles on the ocean floor. The size of the mini basin and the speed of the flow can change how the current behaves. If the basin is big and the current is slow, it starts to fill up with sediment. But if you crank up the flow speed or shrink the basin, the current starts to overflow, spilling over the basin. To study all this, the researchers created a mini version of a mini basin in a pool and used different speeds of flow to simulate turbidity currents. They even made their own sediment mixtures to see how different sizes of particles would behave. In the end, they managed to mimic real-life ocean conditions, but on a smaller, manageable scale. Pretty cool, huh?